and that stick to imbue in them the importance not only of human rights, but to have the United States try to enforce and implement the follow-through of basic human rights in many of these places where those rights are sorely lacking or in danger of being further taken away. Thank you.
Or actually, I can, if you want, I can address.
I want to address the first question about summits and whether we should believe in these sort of summits or not. First of all, I believe it's very important that dialogue happens. Dialogue should happen between Africa and Europe. Dialogue is needed between Africa and the United States and all the other global actors. However, I think what we need is genuine dialogue. I'll give you the tenets of the sort of dialogue that I think should transpire, and I'm not sure whether the summit is still the right space where this can happen. So we do need genuine dialogue because in a globalized world that we're living in, most of the things that are happening in Africa are determined elsewhere. I think that's a fact. And also, in terms of the challenges that ordinary people are experiencing in so many of our continents are quite similar. So the dialogue should happen. Summit, whether summit is the right dialogue or not. Personally, I don't think the manner in which we've witnessed these summits happening everywhere has been respectful. Because we've seen a trend where, for instance, the African Union was celebrating its 50th anniversary last year. Invitations were made to different leaders. For whatever reason, those leaders never showed up. However, shortly afterwards, there was the Africa-Tokyo summit, and African leaders went to Tokyo. There's been different summits that are being organized by countries. Turkey would organize a meeting, Turkey-Africa Summit, and all the 54 countries of Africa are expected to go there. And understandably, for whatever reason, for reasons perhaps we all know, they are going. Right now, I think there are very few leaders that haven't come here. The majority have come. I would encourage everyone to read the blog that Desiree did on this summit, and because it addresses all these things. Otherwise, I think what we need is the summit. Dialogue. How the dialogue is done, it's only called summit. The name summit comes in when heads of state are meeting. That's why they're called summit, if the dialogue is at that level. But I think we need different layers of dialogue. We need dialogue at head states level. We need at technical levels. We need at people level. So I can't answer whether this is necessary or not, but I think I'll still say dialogue is necessary. To the second question, unfortunately, I didn't read the details of how the justification or rationale that was given to the holding of this summit. But like I said earlier on, I just looked at the official agenda that was released, and I saw that there was investing in peace and security, whose emphasis was more on women, investing in women. And then there was, so I imagine the peace and security that was being talked about is not law and order, but rather a holistic approach towards peace, a sustainable, holistic approach to peace. If it's law and order, then I think it should have been called law and order, not peace and security and so on. Because if it's peace and security, then we have to look at the prevention aspect of the peace and security, the management aspect of the peace and security. We also have to look at the resolution aspect of peace and security. I totally, and then also the third element was just written in governing for the future generation. I also imagine governing depending on how broad the conversation is going to be. That gives us room to address issues of governance. Because when you talk about governing for the future generation, when you're talking about the tenets of democracy and governance and accountability, building institutions that are necessary to ensure that we do not have strong men, using Obama's own words, but rather strong institutions. So I hope issues of basic human rights should be at the core of this conversation. If not, then the conversation is not about governing for the future generation, but human rights, I hope, is part of it. And on economic model, yes, I agree. I think the nature of the economic model that we are talking about, earlier said, poverty issues, inequality issues, addressing the youth challenges that we are having. And I think we'll go more into details when we talk about the human security and militarism on some of these things, the challenge of youth and why they're vulnerable and so on and so on. So I hope the economic model will also address issues of extractives, the governance and management of Africa's extractive old and new resources that are being discovered on the continent. So I hope the economic model is a model that's holistic and which will lead to a growth that's sustainable and equitable.
Just very briefly on the impact of the summit. I think into an event like this, even within the government, there are different people who are participating with different motives and different interests. And also, I think the impact of the summit as an event is not just the heads of state talking. Actually, I think that's the least important of what will be going on. And as a matter of fact, I've seen numbers that there are at least 100 different side events of one kind or another, some officially recognized, others like us not officially recognized. And the conversations, some of those will be genuine dialogues. They will be dialogues between different people with different interests and different motives. But we have to look at, it's not just one event at one time, and it's not all going to happen. We don't have the capacity to bring as many people as a president. I mean, we're not even, this whole room is not even the size of one of Nigerian president's delegation. So, you know, I mean, and we struggle to get money to bring 3 or 4 people. So we can't think that we could match them overnight in terms of our media capacity. We do what we can, but we have to think of this as an effort of decades and of building relationships as people do go back and forth, not just engaged in their private business, but make contacts and talk about these issues and increase the number of contacts where these issues are raised. In terms of the human rights issue, I would just say 2 things. It's not just human rights for African countries, it's human rights for the United States, America. And we're talking about basic human rights such as the right to vote, which there are efforts to take away in the United States. We're talking about basic things like the right to water, where Detroit residents are having their water cut off. And that poses an issue where the U.S. economic model is in direct violation of international human rights treaties. When we talk about human rights, it's not just not being tortured, and having the right to vote, and not being killed. It's also social and economic rights. But the U.S. has never signed the social and has never approved the social and economic rights. So when people do not have health care, it is in violation of international standards, which have actually been signed by the vast majority of countries, including almost African countries, not signed by the U.S., but of course none of the countries fully implemented. Similarly, the right to a job, the right to Social Security, the right to organize unions. All of these are human rights that are internationally recognized in international law. Now, it's hard to name a government that actually implements them anywhere in the world. But I think we have to hold the United States, African countries, and all other countries around the world to the same standards of equal rights for all, and not give the impression that it's only some countries that are violating this and that it's the U.S. model that should be exported. It has to be standards that apply to all.
Okay, in response to Obama's policies, he has not had a signature policy. They're piecemeal policies, and they're about 6. There's Trade Africa, Power Africa, YALI, you have the Eradicate Hunger program. They're all quite small scale in terms of the resources put into it, especially when you compare it to Bush's signature policy against HIV/AIDS and then Clinton's AGOA. So here we have the first African-American president in office that hails from Africa, and he is yet to be held accountable on his policies in Africa. And that's where that question, is framed from that perspective. I think expectations were higher in terms of his Africa policy, and we have, the summit, which is a prestige summit. It's going to look good, but in terms of substance and implementation, it's yet to be seen. Yeah. Are there any? Did you want to respond? Okay.
Yeah, one point. It's with great pleasure that all of you are here. I'm very interested in history. All of you were very surprised when Obama became the first person of African descent to be president of the United States. It was a big surprise. Now that he has done 2 things, I'm just going to leave you with 3 things you will walk away from this meeting about the summit. One is, an Obama presidency was unexpected. I know this on this campus. There are a lot of people in this university I talked to about Obama. They didn't expect that he had a chance. Hillary was going to get it. And today is history. He has a second term. When it came first time around, they thought it was a nightmare. When he was re-elected, it was no longer a nightmare, it's a reality. The most important point all of you will walk away from this gathering is that there is a summit. There will be summits after this summit on the side of the United States, because Americans are going to realize that this time around, if they engage Africa meaningfully and have serious dialogue, the United States is going to be left behind by the BRIC nations. That's just the reality for most Americans, whether they like it or not. The Obama phenomena is significant for Africans in the sense that for the first time since the slave trade, you have Africa talking back to George Washington in an interesting way. That's very ironic. It has never happened. If you told George Washington in his grave that one day there will be a slave who will be ruling this United States, you are dreaming, you are crazy. The other thing is, let me bring to you another thing, for you walk away from this gathering. I know when the president of this university, Swigert, I told him, this one African American was fighting for Obama. He was silent, he didn't say anything about it. He was not sure that Obama will get it, he got it. Again, another point I'm going to leave you for this summit. There will be many summits and many more summits. When Teddy Roosevelt was the president of the United States, he went to Kenya on safari. The grandfather of Obama was alive. If you told him that your grandson will be head of the United States, he think you crazy. Now you see, if you tell Teddy Roosevelt, there is a historical connection, for some of you are historians, to know this for today. Obama is the first American president to have a Muslim name, Barack Hussein Obama. For you to understand history from this summit today, is that when Teddy Roosevelt was the chief of police in New York City, the Jews and the Arabs gave him a Muslim nickname. They called him Harun Rashid Roosevelt. He's the only American president who has a Muslim name, Teddy Roosevelt. So when you have this summit today, you have another historical narrative facing you. You have Barack Hussein Obama, who is from Kenya, and he came to the United States. Teddy Roosevelt, again, this is where Howard and Black American history come together. When Teddy Roosevelt was the president of the United States, he wanted to invite Booker T. Washington to the White House. This Southerners say, hell no, that's not going to happen. A nigger in the White House. Guess who is coming for dinner? It has happened. That's why the Obama people gave an award to Sidney Poitier. It has happened. You are witnesses of history today. The third point I want to leave you with, when you leave this gathering today, this is just a summit. It will come and go. But you are witnesses, whether you like it or not, you are witnesses of history. That today, all of you who are here, you are going to be blogging, you tell your friends that there is a summit. It may not have any significance now, but it's going to have great significance tomorrow for the United States and for Africa. The Africans have to wake up. If they don't link up and start organizing transparency, they're corrupt. They take all the money you're talking about. All those trillions you're talking about. There's African money there.
Oh, yes.
You see, we have
And
to
profits.
wake up. This is why American history and black history come together again. If we work so hard against apartheid in South Africa, and it's now history, we have Mandela and everybody jumping up and down. Now, if we work so hard, we have transparency, and we will make sure that you all these dictators, land grabbing and all the things they're doing will come to an end. Please, Oxfam, you represent NGOs. What the great irony I have observed living in the city is that when Mobutu is a dictator in Zaire, the Congolese could not go to the streets and challenge him. It was the missionaries who will lobby by putting pressure on the congressman. That's why Oxfam people come in England. They can put pressure on the British parliamentarians and the C Street people. That's why Museveni is here. Museveni and all those dictators in Africa, they can come here because they have American lobbies, political hypocrisy.